Boker Or, Bekiim Bahalacha, day 31. Siman Mem Zayin 47. Halacha Kav Gimel 23. It says over here like this: if someone begins shachrit and he realized only after it was in the middle of the blessing of Yotzer Or. You remember yesterday was that you only realized that you forgot Birkat Hatorah in the middle of Pesukei Zimra. We brought out a machlok between the Mishnah Brura and the Halacha Brura, right? What do you do? So we said that according to the Halacha Brura, you make the bracha of Asher Bachabanu, right, in the middle of Pesukei Zimra, and after Yishtabach, you do Al Divrei Torah ve'Arevna and Birkat Kohanim, correct?
Pesukei Zimra finish with Yishtabach, no?
Yes, when you finish Yishtabach, that finishes Pesukei Zimra. Okay, but according to the Mishnah Brura, you do all the berachot right then and there in the middle of Pesukei Zimra. There was a machlok between Mishnah Brura and Halacha Brura. Okay, that's what we learned yesterday. Right? Okay, very good. Right? I'm not crazy. No, okay, fine. No, I'm looking at it. Fine. So now this is another halacha. This halacha now is what happens if a person only realized in the middle of the Yotzer Or itself. So then you're not in the middle of Pesukei Zimra. You're in the middle of Yotzer Or. Oops. Yeah? So if someone began shachrit and realized only after he's in the middle of Yotzer Or that he forgotten to say the berachot for the mitzvah of Torah study, he should recite those blessings immediately after completing that blessing. Okay? Yes, after Yotzer Meorot, right? And before he begins Avat Olam. Okay? Now, why is he going to do it right then and there? He's in between paragraphs, right?
Because is replacing.
Very good. Number one, because Avat Olam is going to replace the Birkat Hatorah. Number two, it's in between paragraphs. So that's when you're going to do it, because you're not going to do it in the middle of a paragraph, obviously. Okay? No. This is because that if he waits until after Avat Olam, he's not able to say Birkat Hatorah. And therefore, it's a mitzvah overet, any type of a mitzvah overet, which means a mitzvah that if it's not performed right away, it's not going to be available later on. You're allowed to interrupt between the blessings of Kriyat Shema for a mitzvah overet.
So it's always better to do the real,
well, obviously,
instead of
100%. After saying the blechot of the Torah study, it will not be necessary to recite any blessings, right? But rather before continuing with the Avat Olam. Instead, this person can rely on Kriyat Shema that he's about to recite, and therefore he does not, or he can recite verses after completing his prayer. So therefore, in such a case, you do not need to say the Birkat Kohanim, meaning you're only doing the brachot, right? But you're not doing Birkat Kohanim. Why? Because anyway, you have the Kriyat Shema, which is psukim, and if not, then you can say also other psukim later on. So there's no problem whatsoever. Says 85 in the footnote. There's a ruling of Rabbi Tzion based on similar ruling by Abraham regarding someone who heard thunder while reciting the Shema and its blessings. In that case, he may interrupt to recite the appropriate blessing for thunder, and a number of Achronim concurred with the Magen Abraham. Although some poskim, they disagreed, okay, with that ruling, right? They would probably agree that it's permitted between the blessings or between the passages of the Shema. Since this is a mitzvah overet, the same should apply to reciting the Birkat Hatorah because it's a mitzvah overet. Okay, makes sense, yeah?
But where do you say the thunder between psukim?
Yes, right? You do it between paragraphs. Or even though sometimes it's actually to do with the thunder, it could be that even in the middle of a paragraph you would do it because it's a mitzvah overet. Again, some poskim disagreed, but for sure they would agree that in between, for sure you have what to rely. Okay, meaning in between paragraphs. Okay, although this is the printed ruling of Maravin Shulchan Zion, there are authorities who claim that later he changed his mind. His newer ruling is for the person to continue the blessing of Avat Olam and to have in mind Birkat Hatorah. Immediately after the prayers, he should say some of the psukim of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and that way he definitely fulfills his obligation according to all the poskim. So it's incredible that means there's a printed version of what Rav Ovadia held, and then you have the entire concept of the oral law, right? That he said, and basically he was saying, no, you know what? Don't do it in the middle, right? And then you're going to do Avat Olam. Avat Olam is your Birkat Hatorah, and then afterwards you're going to say. Right, everything. So now we have to find out where is this exactly, right? I apologize. We missed out the what about the verses of Birkat Kohanim, and then it's 86, which we just did right now. So let's do what about the verses of Birkat Kohanim? In the Maran Shulchan Zion's ruling, he added that this person should also say Birkat Kohanim immediately after the blessings before he begins Avat Olam. So interesting. That means, right? We're on the bottom of the footnote, right? One more time. We just said that if you got to Avat Olam, in the printed version, it was written that you stop then and there and you do Birkat Hatorah, but we said do Birkat Kohanim later on. Or you don't have to do it at all. Why? Because Shema, you have Shema, or if not, you can say Psukim later on. Here now it says that in the printed version, Rav Ovadia said, say Birkat Kohanim.
After Avat Olam.
No, before Avat Olam. Remember, it's in between Yotzer Or and Avat Olam. Right then and there, you do Birkat Kohanim as well. You do Birkat Hatorah, do Birkat Kohanim. This is in difference to the poskim, the rule that one must fulfill the Torah study immediately after reciting blessings. Okay, that means this is the right indifference. He says without any interruption. Maran Insurance pointed out that according to Rashi, right, that Rashi wrote that once someone has been forced to interrupt his prayers, it's permissible for him to continue interrupting it with other pertinent speech as well. So our case is a perfect example. Meaning, says Rav Ovadia like this: if anyways you were already permitted to interrupt because of the mitzvah oberet, so therefore you can continue. So therefore you're going to do Birkat Kohanim as well. It's not so necessity as anything else. What's the matter?
Well, because the Kirat Shema is
but even without that, it's a paragraph out, but still you could do it right then and there immediately. So in Yalkut Yosef, however, Maran Yisrael omitted the instructions to say Birkat Kohanim. In the newest edition, though, authored by Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, the author suggested that although he omitted those words, we may assume that whenever it's possible to recite Birkat Hatorah and Torah study, it's likewise permissible and necessary to recite the Birkat Kohanim. Haravmin Mazuz disagreed with this interpretation and asserted that it's apparent that Maran Yisrael changed his ruling when he composed the Yalkut Yosef. He pointed out that there is a sfeka enabling us to assume that it's unnecessary to recite these psukim in this case. First, according to some psukim, it's sufficient to say Shema, okay? And Avat Olam is not an interruption, right? And on the contrary, it's considered a continuation of Birkat Hatorah. Second, there are poskim who rule that it is never necessary to study Torah immediately after Birkat Hatorah. That therefore they permit interrupting with other conversation. Therefore, it's best not to interrupt between Yotzer Meorot and Avat Olam, right? Any more than what's absolutely necessary. In fact, Rabbi Yitzchak admitted that he asked his father whether he purposely omitted the instructions to recite the verses or not, and he answered that he indeed omitted it, right, on purpose, since it's best not to recite the psukim. As soon as the prayers are over, however, it's recommended to say those psukim. So that's why that is, even though it was written at the beginning that you should do the Birkat Kohanim, Rav Ovadia was chazarbo. So that's number one, he was chazarbo. Don't say Birkat Kohanim then and there. Do not say it.
So you do it after the tefillah.
You either do it after the tefillah, and technically you even have Kriyat Shema that you could rely on. Okay, but you have that. Next halacha was, what about the oral version of what Rav Ovadia held? Meaning, remember, according to the printed version, you do right after Yotzer Meorot, you do Birkat Kohanim. And then we just said that even though Rav Ovadia at the beginning said that you should also say Birkat Kohanim, Chazarbo retracted, he said, no, you don't do Birkat Kohanim. According to the oral version, you don't do the Berachot at all. And you rely upon Avat Olam. And you have that in mind. So where does this come from? The Halacha Brura disagreed with the entire ruling of the Yabi Omer and the supposed retraction, and instead ruled that this person should not recite the blessing at all. He should intend to fulfill his obligation with the blessing of Avat Olam, and then recite Pesukim after his tefillah.
But why psukim? If you say Shema.
You're right, but it could be there's a whole machloket. Is Kriyat Shema, technically speaking, is that psukim for psukim? Or is it technically speaking, it's part of the tefillah, and therefore you're doing Kriyat Shema Doraita, but it's not that you're learning it for psukim.
Okay.
For example, when you do Kriyat Shema early, let's say plag, so there, according to everybody, you're doing Kriyat Shema for Kidivret Torah. Like you're learning Torah, so it's psukim, right? Or for example, you're doing it in Shachrit and you're doing it way too late after all this money. So then it's like Kikoreh Torah. But if not, maybe it's like a psukim of the Torah. Maybe it's just that you're fulfilling your obligation of Kriyat Shema, of not a psukim though. Okay?
When you pass the Siman of Shema, then you finish. Then
what's coming out, which is very interesting, is that Halacha Brura is saying that this is a psak of his father, orally, that he changed his mind. Because even though here on the bottom it just says that the Halacha Brura disagreed with the entire ruling of the Biomen and everything, right? And therefore he ruled like this on the top. It's mashma that this is what, that Rav Ovadia himself changed his mind. You understand? So therefore, this is a big machloket then. We have a big machloket between the Yalkut Yosef and the Halacha Brura. What are you supposed to do? Okay? Fine. Halacha number 24. As mentioned above in Halacha 21, the blessing of Avat Olam can count as Birkat Hatorah, but only if the person learns Torah immediately afterwards without interruption. The Amidav Shachrit, however, does not constitute an interruption. In fact, the Vidui confession, right, does not constitute an interruption either. The term immediately afterwards means immediately after all the compelling sections of the prayer. And the sections that follow the supplications, including Asher, Valetzion, and everything else, in Tanat V'Eliyahu, are also a fulfillment of the obligation of learning Torah immediately after. That means, technically speaking, all you have to do Tanat V'Eliyahu is learning Torah, right? All the psukim, all these things is also learning Torah. So all these things is also considered part of it. There's no problem. Okay, fine. 87. The Kaf HaChaim Sofer. Citing the Ma'amar Mordechai Petach David, ruled that the vidui supplication is not considered an interruption. The Mishnah Berurah likewise also cited the Or Zarua, stating that none of the additions to the prayers constitute an interruption. The Rishon LeZion al Ashrei, right, which is the daily psalm, the passage of the Ketoret and Tana Eliyahu, they are the Torah learning, the following the Midah. The Mizashrei is your Torah learning. The Ketoret, right, Tana Eliyahu, right, that's what it is. That's what you're saying. That is Torah study. Okay? The verses included in the supplications cannot count as necessary Torah learning, since we do not recite them as a Torah study, but rather as prayers. As explained above in Halakha 13, it technically is permissible to recite Pesukim as a text of prayers without first reciting the blessings of the Torah. The Halakha Berurah states that even if the person recited his words of Torah after completing the entire Shachrit service, including Ashrei and everything, it still validates his Zavat Olam, as well as Birkat Hatorah, and the sources for this ruling is Or. It seems, however, that the phrase including Alenu L'Shabeach was added by mistake. If the person has reached Alenu L'Shabeach, that means he's already recited the passages of Asher U'Valetzion and the Pitum Ketoret. So all those passages are considered Torah study as well, as we already explained. So therefore, you don't need that anymore. Obviously. Meaning you don't need Alenu L'Shabeach if you already said Ashrei, and you did U'Valetzion, and you did the Ketoret, and you did Tana Eliyahu, obviously. Fine. What is it meant then after the prayer? The Shulchan Aruch rules that when someone relies upon the Avat Olam to cover his obligation, right, of Torah study, of the Birkat Hatorah, he must say some words of Torah immediately after the prayer. This likely means immediately after completing the Amidah. But on the other hand, Shulchan Aruch says you're not allowed to speak between Amidah and Tachanun. It's a Shulchan Aruch Mefurash. Asur l'daber. A lot of people don't realize. A lot of people think they just finished Chazarat Hashatz, that's it. No. You're not allowed to speak until after Tachanunim. Okay? You're not allowed to. It's written in Mefurash, by the way. It's written not with You're not allowed en l'daber, right? Ad acharei Tachanunim. You're not allowed to talk until after the Tachanunim. Okay? So it could be that if someone speaks words of Torah for the purpose of validating the bracha of Avat Olam, so maybe be'emet, it's not considered an interruption, right? And the Mishnah Berurah actually came and he admitted that it is permissible to interrupt for the sake of a mitzvah. So therefore, it shouldn't be any worse than a mitzvah. Okay? Which makes sense. Okay? Fine. So this finishes now 87. So now, although some authorities 25, halakha number 25, although some authorities rule that by reciting Shema, one automatically validates the status of Avat Olam, right, of the Birkat Hatorah, others claim that it does not accomplish that. They argue that the act of reciting Shema is not one of Torah study. It is more of a prayer or a declaration of allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Meaning, you're Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. זה לא... אתה מצאת או לא? So we just said that the Shema is not considered Torah study because it's allegiance of Hashem. One must always try to recite blessings over the mitzvah of Torah study before saying Avat Olam, and not to rely upon it to cover your obligation always. Okay? If it does happen, though, that someone says Shachri prayers without first saying the Birkat Hatorah, and then he failed to recite the words of Torah immediately after completing the Amidah, we still assume that he fulfilled his obligation to the reciting of Avat Olam and Shema is based upon this principle of Saveh B'Rachol Lakel. And if someone prays after the time allotted for the mitzvah of reciting Shema, then for sure the Shema is considered an act of Torah study, and therefore it's good for Avat Olam. That's what I told you before, because if it's going to be after the Zman of Kriyat Shema, it's not anymore Kriyat Shema, it's like Hekoreh B'Torah. So for it is Torah study. Okay? And that's it. We finished today's